So I've been having a bit of a conniption this season, and Martin has gotten an earful from me in various moments, both my ups and my downs when it comes to the South Carolina women's basketball team this year. For the fourth time this season, South Carolina will be taking on Texas, and this time the trip to the national championship is on the line. South Carolina leads the series 2-1, having beaten them once in the regular season and then again in the SEC championship game. And as you saw there in the clip, my big concern for this South Carolina team this season has been the guard play. Right. When you look at, in fact, at the end of the season last season, when we were reacting to South Carolina winning the national championship, the one thing that I pointed out in that conversation, we don't have the clip for it today, but one thing I pointed out in that conversation is when you look at the guards, Raven Johnson, Tahina Paopao, Tessa Johnson, Malaysia Fulwiley, I fully expected that to be the best guard group in the country. I even said at the top of the season that one of the things I'm looking at as far as how successful South Carolina can be this season as it relates to getting back to and hopefully winning their second consecutive national championship, fourth overall, would be how well the guards play, because we no longer have the 6-7 advantage down low of Camila Cardoso, obviously that we relied on so much last season to win that national championship. And there have been moments where I have been over the moon happy and ecstatic. There have been moments where I have been down in the dumps, absolutely pissed off at the basketball that I've seen from our guards. I will be honest. So much so, and I've had so much focus on the guards that at times this season, I've almost taken for granted how well a Joyce Edwards has played and how well even a Chloe Kitts has played. There were a stretch of the season when Chloe Kitts was the best player on the team. Yeah. And you could argue, at least from a totality standpoint, as far as the body of work that each player has put together individually, that Chloe Kitts has probably been the best player on the team all year. As far as consistency is concerned, as far as like playing big and playing well in big time games, right? She obviously didn't play that great when we got blown out against UCLA earlier on in the season. But when you look in the games when she's playing well, when she's getting double doubles, more often than not, we're winning those games. And so shout out to Chloe Kitts for that. When I look at this Texas matchup from the South Carolina standpoint, and I think back to Sunday's game against Duke, what I saw in that Duke game, what I've seen in all of these games, really, except for the Tennessee Tech game where we beat them up handily, which, I mean, no disrespect to Tennessee Tech, but, I mean, that's to be expected, right? Look at the Indiana game. Look at the Maryland game, even the Duke game.
Right.
There was at no point in time in either of those three games until, like, the very end when they kind of pulled away, where South Carolina looked like the number one seed in their region, the number two team overall in the tournament, and more importantly, the team that Dawn Staley and others were saying was deserving of the number one overall seed in this tournament, which obviously went to UCLA. Like, that was the big thing for South Carolina going in. It's like, the way that we have our schedule set up and the way that we played games this season, who we beat, when we beat them, how we beat them, we deserve to be the number one overall seed in this tournament. And you would think, feeling that way, that they would come out and they would play that way. And 3 out of 4 games up to this point, they haven't, right? At no point in time, except for down the stretch of these games, did South Carolina look like the better team on the court definitively, right, throughout the course of the game. The Indiana game came out flat. The Maryland game, you come out flat. The Duke game, you come out flat. We're down to the last 4. And this is a Texas team that you are very familiar with. You come out flat, they're going to punch you in the mouth. Like, this isn't a Texas team that's just going to, like, this isn't a team that's going to make many mistakes the way that we saw Duke make, the way that we saw Maryland make, the way that we saw Indiana make down the stretch of games. And when I look at this South Carolina team, and when I look at the guards, and we had Chloe Kitts playing iso ball on the wing on Sunday against Duke. Like, when have we ever done that? And so last thing I'll say is this. In the clip, the precursor to that clip, I was talking about how my frustration with this team wasn't so much about the fact that they hadn't dominated this season, because I didn't expect them to dominate this season and go undefeated, obviously. I didn't expect that. But what I expected is, with the absence of Camila Cardoso, there needed to be an adjustment made with the way that the team functions, right? You mentioned a point in that episode that we did about how when you think of South Carolina, you don't think of good ball movement and great passing and all that stuff. You think of great post play and you think of dominant play down low. And the point that I was making was, well, we don't have that. What we do have is 4 very talented guards who are each good at one thing individually. Tahina Paopao last season was the best 3-point shooter in the country. We haven't really seen that much this season. Raven Johnson, that was the revenge tour last season, and she was, I would say, the best perimeter defender on the team last season. She hasn't really been that this year. Tessa Johnson came up big in the tournament. You talked about how in that show, after we reacted to the championship, where Dawn Staley said, if you would have told me in June the Tessa Johnson that we saw in the tournament is what we would have gotten, I would have told you were crazy. The growth we saw from Tessa Johnson over the course of the season was remarkable. And then, of course, Malaysia Fawali, she's the Showtimes, she's the facilitator, especially in the fast break. And we've seen that from her. But collectively as a unit, when you don't have the 6-7 advantage down low, you have to rely on consistent play from your guards. And my frustration has been, it was at that point, and even has been to this point in the tournament, we haven't been getting that. And we're going to play the clip a little bit later. I said that South Carolina and UConn were going to meet each other in the national championship this season. So far, I feel pretty prophetic that we've gotten to this point, and that still seems to be intact, and it's still possible. I do think South Carolina can win this game, but you're about to play a team that you've played 3 times before, a team that you beat on the last time you saw them. And if you remember, South Carolina blew out Texas in the first meeting, and in the second meeting, Texas got their get back. And Maddie Booker, at the end of that game, she said, last time they out-toughed us, and we weren't going to let that happen again. This time we out-toughed them. Well, in the SEC championship game, South Carolina out-toughed Texas.
Yeah.
So if history is any indication, they're not going to let South Carolina out-tough them again. They're going to come in with a different game plan. And so the guards have to be better. Like this has to be a game where we see these guards play the way that they played around this time of last season en route to a national championship. If we don't get that, we're going to see Texas playing in a national championship game on Sunday.
I tend to agree with you. I think the South Carolina guards have to win this game, especially because Texas is the biggest thing about Texas is how big they are. It's their size. Kyla Oldeker, how do you say your name? Taylor Jones, Maddie Booker, like they have bodies. They're big. Now, where I push back with what you said is I think we're going to see another low scoring game. That SEC championship game, they held Texas to 45 points. Texas doesn't score a lot of points. When you say they'll punch them in the mouth, that's not what Texas does. They're tough. They're big. They can hang with you, but only if you're not going to be scoring on them. They're so long and so big, it makes their defense so stout, and it's not easy to score on them. So I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, and it's going to be another stressful game for you because it's going to be low-scoring and it's going to be tight. Unless South Carolina guards can really get into a rhythm, be hitting threes, like unless South Carolina's offense can run it up on them a little bit because they won the SEC championship game by 19 points. It was 64-45. Texas scored 45 points. Now, the only way, in my opinion, not the only way, but the main way Texas gives themselves a chance to beat South Carolina is if Madison Booker takes at least 20 shots. She's been getting double-digit shot attempts, but she hasn't. The last time she took over 20 shots, guess when that was? When they beat South Carolina. Yeah. The time before that, the game before that, when she took at least 20 shots, guess when that was? The win against South Carolina was in February. The game before that, when Madison Booker took at least 20 shots, was their win against Tennessee in January. Big SEC wins for Texas, right? Maddie Booker took at least 20 shots. I don't think she's had to in these last couple games because, again, these are low-scoring games. Texas is not the type to come out and, like, punch you in the mouth from an offensive standpoint. Like, if you're not scoring, it's not like they're just going to be running up and have 25 points in the first quarter. That's not really how they typically operate. But I offensively, if Texas is going to get over the hump, Maddie Booker's got to take at least 20 shots. And I loved in the UConn game, this past UConn game where they were saying that they've taken the leash off Sarah Strong. Gino said Gino was saying before the game in their shoot around, they're going through their looks and their sets and they're telling Sarah, hey, don't give up that shot. Don't pass up that shot. The time for being unselfish and passing up shots is over. Yeah. Get your shots up. And we saw her have a little bit, we've seen her have a little bit more of that mentality. Yep. Vic Schaefer has to instill that in Madison Booker. Take at least 20 shots. That's the only way that they're going to compete, but that's the only way that we win this game, I think.
Our guy Nick Andre asked a question in the comments, and we're going to answer it on the other side of this quick ad break.
Women's basketball fans, we embrace you here on the Protect Our Queens podcast. We want you to join our conversations, so make sure you subscribe to Basketball Society right here on YouTube, and you can join in on our weekly episodes live, and you won't miss out on any of our content.
Before we answer this question in the comments real quick, to everyone that's watching right now or watching on the playback, we appreciate you for tapping in. Please leave your thoughts, ask any questions, what have you, in the comments. Nick Andre asked, do y'all think SEC's offensive inconsistencies can come to bite them? I do.
I only think it's going to hurt them against UConn. I think UConn is and that's why in their last game, they got blown off the floor by UConn, because that is a high-powered offensive team. Right. Texas is not a high-powered offensive team, so I think they're going to be fine in this game. I think it's going to be competitive, but just like Indiana and Maryland and Duke, they're gonna beat them, and they know they can beat them because they're SEC. They know each other. I think Texas has a little bit of momentum they're riding right now, and I think that could help them. I think sometimes that experience playing against a team can help. And when the stakes get higher, sometimes you're able to rise above. Madison Booker could turn out to be the best player on the floor. And like I said, that's the best chance they have, is if she is that, but not in this game. This is a game where you can be offensively deficient and still win, because Texas isn't a high-powered offensive team.
So here's the last thing I'll say on this before we transition over to the UConn-UCLA matchup, which is the nightcap on Friday. Coming into the tournament, you and I talked about the 1 seeds. We previewed we looked at the brackets after Selection Sunday, the Monday morning after we talked about it. And the one thing that you and I both agreed upon is the weakest of the 4 number 1 seeds entering the tournament was Texas, for various reasons, right? We both agreed on that. I went as far as to go on Instagram and post a reel saying that whoever won the Tennessee-Ohio State matchup would beat Texas in their eventual meeting. And then when Nick was on the show last Monday, I said that I thought that Tennessee would do Texas really, really bad. Not looking good for me right now when it comes to talking about Texas. But what I will say is this. Even though coming into the tournament, you and I were on the same page about Texas of the 4, South Carolina, Texas, UCLA, USC, the weaker of the number 1 seeds. Excluding Juju's injury, because obviously that plays a massive part in USC not still playing basketball right now. But up to that injury, if you looked at the number 1 seeds and you asked me to rank them according to who I thought was playing the best, I would say that UCLA was playing the best. I would say that USC was right behind them. I would give you Texas. And I would say that South Carolina, based on the body of work that they displayed, has been the worst of the 4 number 1 seeds so far this tournament. They're the only number 1 seed that doesn't have multiple double-digit wins in a game this tournament, I believe. Last I checked, I think they're the only one. UCLA has at least 2. I think Texas has 2, and I think USC has. Yeah. And I said USC before obviously Juju got hurt. I think they had 2 as well. The only double-digit win that South Carolina has is when they blew the doors off of Tennessee Tech in the first round. So when we talk about offensive inconsistencies, I think you're right. I think because Texas isn't an offensive unit and an offensive powerhouse, they might be able to get away with it. But I'm not just thinking about getting away with it. I'm thinking about, for South Carolina, what's on the other side of this matchup should they win.
Yeah, that's why I said UConn. It's going to hurt them against UConn, but not Texas.
We can't wait until the national championship to decide.
Well, I mean, bro, listen,
to play the way that we need to be playing to win a championship.
Yeah, but look, bro, at the end of the day, and I know you're a fan, and it makes you emotional when you're a fan, and you watch your team and you have your complaints. You're in the Final Four. Despite all this stuff,
I understand
all the complaints and all the worries and concerns, you're in the Final Four. You're one game away from the national championship. So you're here. Like you're here. You have a chance. Like no matter what it is, you're here. You still have a chance. I don't think it's gonna hurt. I think Dawn's coaching, like I said in the clip, their depth is their crutch. Mm-hmm. That's why they can win low-scoring games. That's why they don't have to blow the doors off, because even if it's a close game against Duke or Maryland or whatever, they don't have the depth to beat out what South Carolina is hitting you with. They have too many weapons, and that's been enough to get them to another Final Four. I think it'll be enough to get them to the national championship. Now, if we have South Carolina, UConn in the national championship, that's where South Carolina is going to have to put on their offensive thinking hats and put on a better performance than the last time they played. Or South Carolina bucks up and holds UConn to under 70 points and gives themselves a chance to win. If it maybe they're going to become, one of the great all-time defensive teams that ends up going from the Sweet 16 through the national championship, not having to score 70 points to win the national championship. Maybe. Regardless, bro, even up to this point, I heard someone, I was on Twitter Spaces listening to hundreds of people talk about Olivia and all this different stuff with the Final Four. And I heard someone bring up the point that this might be Dawn Staley's best coaching job. Based on all the factors we're talking about, that this is her probably least overall talented team that she's made a run with here in these last 5 to 6 years, or during this era. If they get to even getting to the Final Four, if they get to the national championship, if they win the national championship, it's not just going to be impressive that they went back to back. It's going to be impressive that Dawn did it with this group. And when we're going to have to talk about the coaching job she did, because despite all the concerns that we've both had, basketball fans have, South Carolina fans have, they're still in the Final Four. They're one of the 4 teams left, and they could still win the national championship. And I think the only team that's going to stop them at this point is UConn.